Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We're in poem number 120, If This Is Fading, another sunset poem. And I think this is an interesting poem because I'm going to make the argument that Emily is channeling a whole lot of John Keats in this poem, especially Ode to a Nightingale. We'll have more to say about that here in a moment. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already been exposed to our set of introductory comments, and then I'm also hopeful that you have been working with us through the preceding 119 poems. We just finished with Talk with Prudence to a Beggar. Now, I mentioned John Keats, and we've given full lectures on this poem at learnstrong.net. But in the spring of 1819, Keats, of course, visiting a pal of his, listened to the Nightingale and then began to pen the famous Ode to a Nightingale, published in July of 1819. Now, just to remind, this poem, N120, published 1859, so you can kind of get a sense of it. And certainly Emily knew this poem, knew, I think, that the F word, as we call it, of this poem, the word is fade, and that will be the central word of the poem that we're about to read. But you'll remember this in Ode to a Nightingale in part 3 and in part 6. He will say it this way: fade far away. Of course, writing this just after he started coughing up blood, which told him that his consumption was getting worse, which told him, of course, that soon he must die. Fade far away, dissolve and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known, the weariness, the fever, and the fret, here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and laden night despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. And then later in the poem in part 6, darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many amused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever it seems rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. The other thing I want to point out before we read this poem is, notice that in 9 lines of a poem, you have 5 exclamation points. I think that is significant as well. The poem itself, majestic. If this is fading, oh, let me immediately fade. If this is dying, bury me in such a shroud of red. If this is sleep, on such a night, how proud to shut the eye. Good evening, gentle fellow men. Peacock presumes to die. Now, it is significant that the construction of this point is this if, then type of construction. We've seen this before. Keats loved this construction, and as I have made the argument in my lectures on John Keats at learnstrong.net, I think a lot of that came from his study of Chaucer. Especially, you'll remember that opening set of lines in the general prologue. It was the when, then construction. Shakespeare, of course, playing similar games with this if, then construction. And here it is. Notice again, to the sunset. If this is fading, notice in quotation marks. And I think one of the reasons it's in quotation marks, to me, has to do with Keats in To a Nightingale. Oh, let me immediately fade, again, sounding very much like Keats. If this is dying, in other words, the end of the day, sunset, bury me in such a shroud of red. Again, Emily loving her colors, no doubt. If this is sleep, and of course, this idea takes us back to the gospel accounts, of course, when you'll remember with Jairus' daughter, Christ will say to Jairus, she's not dead, she is asleep. And so we're playing that game. If this is sleep on such a night, how proud to shut the eye. It's an interesting word, proud. And again, go back to the lines that I was working with a few moments ago with Keats. And then, good evening, gentle fellow men. Now, I find this fascinating, given what she said in the earlier poem, 118, that we've already covered, My friend attacks my friend. You'll remember that she said, had I a mighty gun, I think I'd shoot the human race. And then the glory run. We talked about the controversial nature of that set of lines. Notice here she's back now with fellow men. It almost seems as if her view of the human race is somehow changed. Gentle fellow men. And then, of course, Peacock. One other time we've she will have used peacock, and you'll remember it in poem 64, Peacock's Purple Train. Peacock presumes to die. In other words, the multicolored effects, if you will, of the peacock as the sun is setting. I love that she uses the word presumes as well, decides, presumes. Well, what are we doing now at 2a with a poem like this? I think our argument is that death is not to be feared in the end, but rather to be embraced. At 2b, again, the vague antecedent of this, obviously the sunset. At 3a, well, obviously to a nightingale, but think about John Donne's Death Be Not Proud, that famous sonnet. We've given full comments at learnstrong.net on that one. Finally, at 3b, what is your view on sunset? What is your view on dying? As we have said, they taught it to us from the time we were quite young, when as we were swinging at the park, we didn't want to go to the van, and they said, no, honey, you can't swing forever at the park. You got to go to the van. And as we say, you've not met any 200-year-old people. Everyone's got to go to the van. And how do you balance that notion that you know you have to fade, and what will that be like? And of course, sunsets help us maybe get there, along with Emily, right? Thank you.